Simon, welcome to the channel, man.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, as somebody who's a fan of your channel, I've been watching you for probably about 10 months now, maybe about a year. I love the content you put out. Ian and I are real estate here in Austin, and we're, I guess you could say, the boots on the ground. So we see stuff that's happening here. You have an amazing kind of unique perspective because you work at a lumber yard selling lumber, and you see things in a much different way than we do. And you put, when I've seen you talk about the economy in general, the stuff that you say is just pretty impressive because you're seeing it from a much different eye than we are. And some of the stuff that you've said in the past has come back to be 100% correct.
Man, I'm doing really good. Life has changed a lot for me over the last 5 years, and honestly, I can say that I'm doing really well now. So thanks for asking.
So in the market right now, what are you seeing? So the other day you put out a video, you were talking about how they wanted to increase inflation because it was too low. What are you seeing in general, just in the economy right now? And I'll just let you take the floor, man.
Well, what I see going on in the economy right now is pretty much what I had been talking about the entire time. A lot of people looked at the inflation. They looked at the Federal Reserve. They say money printer go burr, prices go up. What else do you need to see? And working a retail job, working, a till, and then also having a perspective by communication with my vendors. So I work a retail lumber yard. I sell 2x4s for a living. Like, I literally sell them right at a till. So a lot of people, like, when they think about lumberyard workers, they're thinking about, like, this big train yard full of like lumber and stuff like that. That's not me. I mean, I'm literally like selling a handful of 2x4s and then going down to the yard and putting those in the back of somebody's truck. But I also order a lot of material for the yard. So I'm in communication with the vendors out there. So I have a very unique perspective when it comes to the retail market and to the wholesale market. I get to see both of those. And when I saw that there was this buildup of inventory and then a complete diminishing of it and then a rebuild of this inventory happening with lumber, I was questioning that. I was like, okay, so the prices that we're seeing in the 1,700 per thousand run up, I think that has a lot more to do with the supply chain constraint than it has to do with the money printer go burr. People said I was crazy for that. And later I figured out that that was the bullwhip effect. Actually, I learned that from the people on my channel. The more I started studying the bullwhip effect, I realized this is taking place throughout the entire economy. And at some point, we were going to see a buildup of inventory. Well, now you're starting to see that at Walmart and Target. You're starting to find that this inventory buildup is such a dramatic one, and they don't have the necessary help to get that basically from the containers to the shelves. We're starting to see where prices are going to stay elevated until we actually have that inventory flowing through the system on a more consistent and efficient basis. So that's kind of what I see happening right now. Is there's a huge buildup of inventory, but there's not the available manpower to actually bring this stuff to the consumer, and the consumer is now getting nervous about recession. So
yeah, I mean, we're seeing this on the other side of it, right? So Ian and I both have sold so many new build homes in the Austin area, and what you talked about, the bullwhip effect, probably like 3 weeks ago is the first time I heard you say it. And I was like, holy crap, this is what's happening right now in Austin, because for the longest time we had a buildup where we couldn't get people to build homes. We couldn't get the product from the mills. We couldn't get windows. We couldn't get stuff. The supply chain was so backed up and so just bad for the building for new builds. Now we're seeing these new construction homes that are finally like coming online, and with inflation, with interest rates rising, now we're seeing a buildup of the actual inventory, and a lot of it's not even complete yet, right? So they're putting it up for sale, but it's still 4 or 5 months away from being complete. So I think we're seeing a lot of this buildup in inventory for that reason. What do you think is going to happen? They just had the announcement that we're at 9.1 inflation. What do you think is going to happen kind of moving forward from here?
I see a bunch of people tightening up. They're gonna stop, the frivolous spending. They're gonna hold back and start, stacking up on cash, getting ready for a recession, getting ready for a downturn. You can already kind of see it happening, even in the because I was reading a little bit about the sales, and yeah, the number, like the overall bottom line number, that's up, but the actual transactions, those are diminishing, and that's the economy right there. It's not so much a matter of like how much money is being spent. It's more about the transactions. How many transactions are you doing? Because that's showing money velocity, and that's starting to slow down. Eventually, that's going to start running into a deflationary issue.
How do you think that that's going to hit the housing market, because we, obviously Ian and I in the housing market, we're seeing this, we have a buildup of inventory. Had we had this much inventory or spread this out over the last 6 months, I don't think prices in especially Austin would have increased almost 100,000 from January till June. So I wish we'd have had a lot of this inventory spread out, further, down the line, like February, March, April, May. But how do you think that this is really going to impact pricing for homes in the near future?
Well, it's going to definitely put a limit on how much they're going to increase. That's for sure. But I
Yeah.
have to ask, like, how much inventory has it doubled? Has it tripled? How much inventory have you seen increase in the Austin area?
I was going to say, I think it's between that double or triple number, which is
Mhm.
interesting. It's been a lot, substantial increase.
Right. Now
Yeah.
that's when you think about it like that, it is a substantial. Like, we've got double the inventory, we've got triple the inventory we once had. But I would take a look at the chart and see how far back you go to find the same inventory levels. Now, I was watching a great presentation at the Rebel Capitalist Live event where Jason Hartman was showing the inventory levels, and he was explaining that even if you were to double or triple them, you would still be historically low. So what is
Right.
that going to do to prices if you think like on a historical manner? Now, like perception, when you think, oh gosh, double, triple the inventory, and you're like, my gosh, look at all this inventory that's happening out there. But on the grand scale, when you look at it on a longer time chart, is it really that much more inventory happening there? It will freak markets out. It'll freak the person out thinking, oh my gosh, I'm trying to sell my house onto this like double tripling inventory market. And so they start dropping the prices and, in order to deal with this perception they have. But is the reality of the situation really that? I mean, that's what
I,
I would have to like kind of question. Sorry, go ahead.
I actually love that you went into that. Is the reality what people are seeing? And I think the numbers can be skewed so many ways. And Jeremy and I talk about this all the time, specifically when you're looking at new construction versus resale. And when is that new construction actually going to be available? People that don't have the data resources are looking at it like, oh, well, we've got double or triple the inventory. But it could be that some of these new construction vendors, they have it listed as if it's inventory, but it won't actually be available for another 4 or 5 months. And on the flip side of that, how many homes do they have ready? They just haven't hit go yet and put on the market, which is inventory that's available, but obscured. Nobody knows about it.
And another thing to kind of go with that is that over the last year, 2 years, the rate of completion of homes has been spanned out, right? So like before, when I just kind of take the example of a vinyl windows, and like I used to get vinyl windows in 10 days. I could order a window, and in 10 days later, I would have it. Now it's like 2.5 months. Now, if you were building, like, I don't think about necessarily like the big home builders, like the big guys, but I just think about all the rest of the guys who maybe build 2 or 3 homes, at a time. Maybe that's as much as they're doing. They mess up that window package, they just push their completion of their home out 2 months. So there is any little mistake inside of the logistics, and you're pushing that home completion out ever farther. So how much inventory is going to come on the market when these homes begin to be completed? Like, how many are being stressed out to a longer time, not entering inventory when they should? That's a really big question. I don't think a lot of people kind of have the data for. Like, I don't even know, because there's
Right.
no real data of that except for like how much are completed and how much actually make it to market.
Well, that's what we've seen here, because a lot of these builds, and we talk about this a lot, because I had a property I put under contract as a new build just south of Austin. It took 16 months to build. Regular with pre-COVID, we're talking 8 months. So it took almost double the time to build this home. And it was just like little things like that. I had a client, we're finally closing this month, and their window package pushed them out 2 months. Somebody stole the window package the day it landed. So usually that's an inside job.
Right. Isn't that the case though? I mean, it was just like, I mean, really, you only had to like lose just a couple of them to have the same effect, but still somebody stole the entire package, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also have to think, you push that project out 8 months. How much added cost did that put to that house, right? A lot. How
Yeah.
much can you actually discount it because of that? Probably not a lot. So is this really going to drive the prices down by having an inventory come to market that has been delayed, but yet that delaying has actually added the cost to the house, so there is no real chance of being able to lower the price and still stay profitable, keep your margins going?
I love this discussion about like how we're theorizing what's actually happening versus what we're seeing, because you see a lot of national numbers put out. You see a lot of Austin numbers put out. In Austin, we have a lot of builders and a lot of builds happening, very different from other places in the country. We have space. So builders have latched onto that and said, okay, we can build a lot of homes. And even if they are scaling back, it's a very different ratio of build than it would be almost anywhere else in the United States. And so people are looking at these numbers, or they hear Austin when really it might be Austin and Georgetown as an area, or is it Austin proper, right? Like these things are skewing the numbers, and people are taking national data as factual information for local data.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree with that. Like, I have to look at my own area around here. Now, I'm up in the northwest corner of Oregon. We don't have like vast areas to build many homes. I mean, homes here are pretty much built on single lots, and you might find a development here and there, where there's like, 20, 30 houses are built, but nowhere near like, 400 or 500 homes or anything like that. There's nowhere in my area that has something like that going on. So yeah, there is definitely different ways to view this market from, different locations. And when you're in the middle of a heavy area like you guys probably are, you're going to have a much different view from me than I'm going to have. Like, I kind of watched just from my own lumberyard, just watching the floor packages come through. So you guys are familiar with the TGIs or I-joist packages. That tells me where the home builds are. Like, I can have a lot of inventory in the yard, but that doesn't tell me like how much homes are being built. When I see those floor packages moving through the yard, that's telling me that there's homes being built. And it seems like all the time we have one staged ready to go. So there's a lot of homes being built. It's the completion again that we're looking for. So I mean, that's what I see happening anyway.
What we end up seeing, and Jeremy, correct me if you've seen something different, but like we'll get frequent announcements, and it has slowed down some, but what we'll get is announcements of, hey, they're going to be building 10,000 homes in this community over the next 5 years. And you're like, 10,000? And there's pockets of that. It's not like they're only building 500 or 200 or 50 homes. No, we're building massive numbers. And so if that does scale back and they only build 2,500, I mean, that's still an interesting data point to consider.
Absolutely.
There's a couple of things that, I've run through numbers recently that I find interesting. Half of the homes on the MLS that are on the market right now, so one step back. In January, we were about 1,800 homes in the market, and Ian and I were going, this is nothing. Right now, this time of year, we have 6,000 or 7,000. Right now, we're at 9,000 homes in the market. So we went from basically a 0.4 of a month inventory. We're probably going to end up around 2.5 months. And I kept saying, once prices will keep going up until we get closer to 3 months inventory. Well, we're hitting that right now. But what's interesting is that half the homes currently available on the market are vacant, which means, and half of that is actually new build. The other half is just vacant. So the question is, how many of those are some of these investors that moved into Austin and bought a bunch of homes in Austin? The property taxes went up, and now they're trying to liquidate those because they see, rising tide. And the other half is like, you think about it, those builds that should have closed in January, so if somebody's a move-up buyer, they're and they need to sell their home, they would have sold their home in like February if their home was closing in March. Well, now a lot of those homes are closing. So a lot of those people are putting their homes in the market now, which means they're flooding the inventory. My question is, where do we go inventory wise from here? We're at 9,000 units, typically around October. A lot of people start pulling their homes off the market because they're going into the winter months and they don't want to have their home on the market for Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we see a lot of inventory drop off. I guess if we're talking about what's going to happen in the future, what happens with inventory October, November, December? Where does it go from there? Do a lot of these builders now start flooding the market with more inventory? Think about it. I want to say almost 30% is new build inventory on the market right now. That's a lot.
That does seem like a lot. So you were saying that you got a 3-month inventory. What would be typical? Like, what would be before like all the, like over a 20-year span? Would it be like 6 months, a year? How long would a house typically sit on a market for in your area?
Well, if you think about it, as sales decrease, months of inventory will pile up with the same amount of homes in the market. So let's say if you had like 5,000 homes in the market and you're typically selling 3,000 homes a month, but now it goes down to 2,200 homes a month, and that inventory stayed the same. So your months actually increase. So typically in Austin, I mean, during COVID and around that time, we were at like 0.7 months to 1.2 months on an average year to that, and I always tell everybody to look at 2019 because it's what we're closer to right now, was like 2.7 months inventory. And I think that's probably what will end up in July.
It doesn't seem like that, like, I mean, yeah, it seems like the hot housing market's over, but it seems like we're kind of going back to reality. Yeah.
And I think this is what's scaring people. So I hear more and more from people like, I don't want to buy.
Reality scares
I get
people.
it. Yeah. I get it. Interest rates are high. It sucks. But, and this leads to my next question, where do you see interest rates going with the Fed announcing another 0.75? I mean, I think they're going to announce another 0.75 increase is what I've heard. So where does interest rates and all of this go in the future? And like, how much more does this actually hurt people or dissuade people from buying, or does it make them go, shit, I need to buy right now?
Yeah, I mean, well, you get both of them both happening. I mean, people, like, I get a lot of people telling me that they want to wait, like they want to wait it out. And, but then there's the other people who are like, man, I'm getting in now before it goes up even further, won't be able to make my payments. Like if the interest rates continue to go up, it's just that much harder every month to make those payments. So, I mean, there is definitely both schools of thought on it. Now, what I'm seeing coming from the Federal Reserve is that they're in a position that trying to get the Fed funds rate up to a reasonable level is going to be very difficult for them. You got to think the Federal Reserve really doesn't have a whole lot of tools. They can print money and they can drop interest rates. And when you have interest rates as low as they do, if it's at 2%, that does not give them a whole lot of room to drop and stimulate the economy. So like typically they would want to drop that interest rate, that Fed funds rate around 5%. They're not even close to it. So dropping the interest rates only 2% barely does anything to get people out there borrowing money to buy houses and cars and go on vacation and just, spend that money. So if they can't drop the interest rates 5%, they're going to have to come up with other ideas. And they know that's the problem. So this is really where I feel that they are using the supply chain constraints that are happening now to try and boost their Fed funds as much as they can. Now, they put out the narrative out there, hey, we're trying to deal with this inflation by raising the Fed funds level as much as we can. Now, that perception onto the market, when they hear this, they're like, oh, crap, the Fed is going to lift the interest rates 0.75, 100 basis points. What is this going to do? So they start behaving in ways. The market actually conditions themselves to be in that position before the Federal Reserve actually moves the rates. And they claim they do this for the shock event, like they don't want to shock the markets. And so they put out this narrative so that they can condition them to be there. Well, that has the same impact. Just that putting out that credible threat has the same impact to the markets as if they had raised the rates. So they really don't have to do anything at all. They just have to make sure that people believe that they're going to do it. They do have to follow through with that credible threat. Like if they don't do it, then the markets will be pissed off about that too. So they do have to go through with that credible threat, but eventually they're going to get to a point where they're going to say, we're going to be data dependent on whether or not we're going to be raising rates into the future. When they start saying that, that they're coming to a top, but they're not there yet. They're still trying to get that ammo back. And as long as they have 9.1 on the consumer price index or whatever it came in, whatever index they were following, because I shake my head at a lot of this stuff thinking, I don't know if that's really accurate. But when they have that going on out there and people are still stuck in the inflation narrative, then they can keep raising those rates. And that's them trying to get their ammo back. And so as long as they still have that, they're going to keep pushing those Fed funds level up as far as they can go, because that's what they want to use when next time they have a downturn is to drop those interest rates.
I mean, there's so much to unpack there, though,
I'm sorry, man.
No. I mean, this is why I watch your channel, because I feel like you do a very good job of kind of breaking this down for the average person, right? We had an economist or a lot of people shredded us for this, but we had a guy come on who is a founder of a large financial company, and he kind of gave us an economic update and what to expect in the future. And what's interesting, what difference between like what you're saying and what he's saying, he said that we hit that before the news came out, that we had hit the top of inflation, and then 9.1 came out. So do you think inflation is going to start coming back down soon? And do you think people are going to start traveling if gas prices come down? I mean, those are two separate questions, but the two things that people want to know the most about.
There's a couple of things. Like inflation is a very odd thing to talk about, especially when people have a different perception of what inflation is. Like a lot of people will go like, look how much I paid for, this meal I spent out, or how much it costs for gas. If you really think about the definition of inflation, inflation is the expansion of money and credit. And so that's really what inflation is. Prices are the results of that. So prices are more of a symptom of inflation. And so when you see the Federal Reserve expanding the money supply out there, that's truly like what the inflation is. When you see people borrowing money, that's the inflation. So if you have less people borrowing for houses and cars and, taking out credit card debt, if they're actually paying off their debts, that's deflation. That's like the actual deflation taking place there. The results of that take a while to actually enter into the economy. So like even when the Federal Reserve raised their interest rates, it takes like 6 months to a year before that really starts impacting the real economy out there. The perception that people take is right away, like the markets will start doing things about it. But the real like economy, the actual sales, the actual things that are happening, the transactions, that takes 6 months to a year to be impacted by those lifting of interest rates. So I don't know, I guess I kind of got a little bit off track on that, but that's really where like inflation, I think, is probably misunderstood, is that when you see these supply constraints taking place and that drives up the price because you got a supply and demand issue, everybody points at the Federal Reserve saying money printer and prices go up. And yeah, those two facts are happening there, but there's different reasonings for what's causing the prices to move up. When you have like at the same time this quantitative easing going on, it's very difficult to separate these two and say, no, these don't really have anything to do with each other. For the most part, they do, but they don't, right? You got the supply chain constraint happening, and that's really what's causing the prices to move up. The Federal Reserve and the monetary policies that are happening, that mostly ends up as bank reserves. Like you have to borrow that money to get it into existence. The stimulus, that was like an injection of money. But really, on the grand scheme of things, it was a short-lived stimulus. It was just like a temporary like boost to the economy. And that is like unproductive debt. So it's due back plus interest rates. So the way I kind of relate it is like, okay, so here's stimulus, go get high off of it, enjoy the time. But here in a little bit, you're going to have to work hungover to pay all that stuff back. And that's not a good feeling to be in. I mean, you can relate the economy all the way down to just your personal self. I mean, it's sometimes it's not as easy to look at that way. But, when you go deep into debt and you weren't productive with that debt, then you have to postpone your current spending in order to pay for the past consumption. There's no difference when it comes to the major economy too, when it comes to macroeconomics. At some point, I mean, you can keep trying to go into debt, but it's just that makes the problem worse. And I mean, I'm not saying that it isn't going to happen. I mean, it seems to continue to happen, but at some point you're going to find that you're going to have to work and not buy anything in order to pay off your debts. And that's not fun. I had myself very deep into debt. I had hardly any income coming in. I didn't really have a whole lot of resources. Walking to work every day and taking $20 bills to go down and pay off a $9,000 credit card, there was nothing fun about it. I had to do it for a long time. But then when eventually it ends, well, then your life starts getting better again. But you have to postpone all the fun and consumption and debt and everything else that goes with it. And nobody wants to do that. Nobody does. And especially politically, that would just be suicide. Nobody's gonna vote for somebody who does that.
I like your perspective on the lumber, because a lot of people are saying, when the prices of lumber went up high, you said this has more to do with supply chain and stuff that is happening in Canada. What do you see happening moving forward the supply chain? Obviously, you've said that there's retailers now that you're returning stuff and they're just like, keep it, we'll give you the cash back. I tried to do that with a 86-inch TV the other day, and they would not let me keep the TV and the money. I tried. So I said, hey,
dang it, man. I was going to try to say that. But no, I just heard of that happening. There was obviously articles coming out. I can't imagine every store doing that, but just the fact that it did happen in some areas, I mean, it just goes to show that there is a problem out there with the supply. When it came to lumber, that was a long story leading up to it. I mean, all throughout 2019, I was reporting on mill curtailments, mill shutdowns, inventory depletions. I was reporting on OSB manufacturers taking 200 billion, was it 200? I don't know, hundreds of billions of square feet off the market. It was like quite intense what was taking place at the time. And then here we get hit with like the COVID lockdowns and even more supply constraints, even more, curtailments taking place. So I knew then it was like, man, this is going to be an issue if you don't have a lot of people producing, and that's consumption starts taking place. There's a huge gap taking place. So when the inventory ran out, it didn't surprise me. And then when the demand started kicking in for this lack of supply, I didn't know how far the lumber prices were going to go, but I knew that they were going to fly. They were going to go way up. Now, again, everybody just wanted to say, no, this was due to the stimulus checks and all that. It didn't. It was happening long before. I mean, like a year leading up to it. There was all kinds of reasonings that were taking place, like, with the bug infestation and Canada going into like the British Columbia area doing this salvage mode where they dropped the stumpage fees for all these logs, and those logs became cheap input costs going to these Canadian mills. They were pumping out a lot of lumber going into the United States. So it kind of filled the supply chain up. All of a sudden, the bug infestation salvage mode thing came to an end. Stumpage fees went up. These mills started going into curtailments and shutdowns because they really just couldn't afford to operate at 600 per thousand or even less than that when they were getting, much higher than that. So there was a lot of reasonings that were taking place. I mean, I could just keep going on and on about it. What's happening now, though, is that you still find that there is mills going into curtailment at times because of the bullwhip effect. You got an oversupply, undersupply, oversupply, and this is going to keep going until you find an equilibrium in the matter. How long that takes is like, who knows? It's going to take a while to get there. Not to mention the British Columbia area, who was this major high cost, high output producer, is not really going to be the lumber manufacturing like output like it once was. Those mills, they know this. I mean, you're talking like West Fraser, you're talking like Innifer, you're talking all the big guys, Confer. They're moving operations down to the southern part of the United States where there is a glut of pine trees taking place. And this is probably where you're going to start seeing a lot more lumber pumping out of the eastern, southeastern part of the United States. What I find interesting about it is that all these mills setting up there, they're all Canadian-based mills, operating within the United States, right?
That's
way to avoid
interesting.
tariffs that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that, and I don't know how much you know about this, but
Sure.
under the last administration, they put a lot of tariffs on China, and I don't know how that really impacted us because that's just not what I know. But do you think? And I've heard that they were supposed to take those off, but we still haven't seen any Chinese tariffs have been removed with the new administration. So, do you think that the Chinese tariffs are still impacting the economy here locally, or am I just like crazy for asking that question?
No, even if they were to take them off, it's still going to impact us because what ends up happening is that you destroy relationships, right?
Hmm.
That's what a lot of people don't realize is that the United States, especially like Oregon, where I live, is the number one lumber producing state in the entire country. Like we pump out a lot of lumber out of this state. The other thing that we push out of here is logs, right? So trees are an export. It's a commodity just like anything else out there. And our agricultural base up here is definitely trees, and we ship those things overseas. Now, that's one thing that like a lot of people were kind of complaining about is like, yeah, sure, all these mills make all this money off of the lumber prices, but the loggers aren't getting it. Why is that? It's because we used to pump a lot of logs going over to China, but these tariffs kind of gave them the finger, And so China's like, you know what, you guys aren't cool anyway. We're going to go hang out with Russia, and Russia became the number one forestry exporter. So, that doesn't return. Like you can drop the tariffs all you want, and they'd be like, yeah, we already got our system set up here. So what do you do about that? It's just like you can only drop your prices even more to get them to entice them to start buying from you again. So that's not a good thing for our log exports.
One question I've always, with inflation going up, I mean, the cost of everything has gone up. I mean, we've had a lot of issues with the supply chain, and now gas prices are so incredibly high, and that's obviously going to trickle into everything. Do you think that if the United States were to say right now, like, okay, let's just start pumping oil again, right? Let's do it. Let's get the prices down. Do you think that that would actually have? I mean, I know it's not going to have an immediate impact, but 4 or 5 months down the road, does that curb a lot of this inflation and help us? What do you think there?
Um, by adding oil to the global supply to try
Yeah.
and diminish it, I think they would have to pump an intense amount of oil to make that happen. Like we could supply ourselves with oil. We export more oil than I think we consume, don't we?
Yeah.
So the idea that we could just keep the oil, well, it's a global commodity, so you'd have to provide enough for the entire world to want, and that's like not necessarily an easy task to drop the prices significantly by doing that. Like if you went into isolation, then maybe you could, but then that would create more problems than solve them. So I don't know if the expansion of oil production within the United States is going to actually solve any real problems out there. I think the problems will solve themselves. High oil prices will get people to slow down in the economy. And then once the production starts to slow down, once the manufacturing, the traveling, the buying of things, all that starts to slow down, you're going to see oil start to diminish. I mean, you're going to see the prices come down on that as well. But as of like now, you see that there's this huge demand for most of this stuff, but it's starting to fall. Like, even oil prices are come down. It's under $100 per barrel now. I mean, I live in a really expensive area. I mean, we had fuel at like $5.50 a gallon. It's down at $4.95 now. So there's drop. It's happening. Like people aren't buying as much of it, and then the supply will start to build up, and then you'll start seeing things become more reasonable again. So I do feel that most of this is transitory. I mean, I hate using that word because it's
Yeah.
so overused and everything, but it's still part of like, the bullwhip effect. You can see it happening, and it just takes time, and it shows up in different areas, not at the same time. Like, everybody like looked at lumber for an inflationary scenario, and then now here it is at 650 per thousand, and they can't look at it anymore. So did the inflation just disappear from lumber? I mean, no, it was because of inventory. It was because of supply and demand. And I feel the same thing will eventually happen with oil too. That doesn't mean like the products that are built today don't have that input cost going on. I mean, that happens. So that price is going to stay elevated in there. But what you'll end up happening is something called the Cantillon effect. And if those prices stay elevated, like for example, I have these nails, right? I have the gun nails, right, for framing. And we used to get them from the exact same vendor. We had this big display, all the same vendor, all has the same name on it. Well, then nails came in short supply, right? We couldn't get them. And all of a sudden, like these framers are like buying like pallets of nails because they're afraid they're not going to be able to get them. And so like these pallets would go in and go out. And pretty soon we weren't getting that vendor anymore. We started getting like different vendors. And it was just like, okay, you kind of recognize some of these names. And then I start noticing like all of a sudden we got American made nails, right? Which are really expensive nails. And then we got these really cheap generic nails from like India, and I'm like, these are two like nails that I have never seen before, but this is what we can get. So you have these real expensive nails, and then these ones that are kind of cheap, but they took a long ways to get here. It took more cost and energy and distance to get to us. So they end up being about the same price, when they get there. Well, eventually what you'll find is that the distribution is going to get a lot easier. The transportation is going to become a lot easier. The domestic manufacturers, the American-made nails, sorry, you guys are going to have to go by the wayside because the distribution of these ones have just gotten cheaper, and therefore they're going to have a better price on them. A lot of people don't necessarily look to quality. They just want to know if it's a 16-penny nail that's going to run through their gun, and that's the last thing they ask. What's the price? And so whether it's American-made quality doesn't really matter to them when the bottom line is saying, I want the cheaper one. Yeah.
Well, so real quick, though, when you're looking at those nails working where you were, do you think that the quality is impacted? And if so, does that mean that a lot of our home builders over the last year or 2 years have opted for those nails over the others that they were used to getting?
That's just a small example of like something that I had seen taking place. Like I wouldn't say like all the homes that are being built now are built with these shoddy nails that are just going to fall apart on you. I don't like that's not happening. But it definitely comes down to the bottom line. Like if you're building a home that you're planning on selling, every product is got to be the cheapest thing. You got to get the best price for it. Now, if it's a home that you're building for yourself, or if it's a custom home you're building for somebody, they may go for the more expensive quality, everything that they can find that is the best that they can get because it's their personal home. But if it's something that's going to go for sale, it's the cheapest one that they can get their hands on. And it doesn't really matter what it is. It's just as long as it's a door that swings to the right direction and looks the way with the 6 panels, that's it. Now, okay, I'm done. Buy it, And so,
I mean, what's interesting about what we've seen in the housing market is a lot of these builders are rushing to get product available to sell, right? And so we've seen, Ian and I, we'll go through and walk through homes. I don't know if it's a craftsman issue. I don't know if it's just a trade issue or if it's a quality of product issue. And Christina had her comment right here. It says Chinese drywall. That is all I'm going to say. But I feel like homes that have been built since really late, I'd say probably 2021 and on, like I just don't feel the same quality is there. And I think that's what Ian's trying to get at is, do you think homes are being built with lower quality products, or they're just the same quality of product, one just takes longer to get here?
No, because I mean, when you have new foreign imports, the quality of those new foreign imports are generally less quality than the ones you were getting before that, from the other manufacturers. That's the reason why you're able to get them, is because they're a cheaper product. Nobody else wants them, right? So there is that involved with it. I think really like the bigger issue, because I used to build homes. I don't know if you guys actually framed or did siding or did anything like that in your time, but I used to build homes, right? So okay, so you have, right? So
Yep.
so you got the new kid on there, and he's screwing like everything up. Like he's not putting enough nails in. He's not sheeting. right? So this is more of like where the quality of the craftsmanship really has more to impact the home. Like you can find somebody who can take like the worst material and build something really beautiful out of it. Because in the end, it's the framing is the same whether you're building you know, $1,000 shack or you're building a $1 million home. The 2x4s that go into those two products are exactly the same. There's no difference between that and the CDX and the roofing and all the other stuff that you put into it. Those all have the same product going into it. So it's the craftsmanship that really says a lot more about the house. Now, granted, if you get some like cheap Chinese drywall that destroys all the plumbing in your house, that's a different story. I mean, that is a failed product that should never have existed in the first place. But if it's something that is of fairly good accuracy as far as like, comparison, then, it comes down to craftsmanship. And right now, I don't see a whole lot of people in the trade that are good quality craftsmen. Like, I mean, up and coming people who like believe in quality and stuff. It's more like they're just slamming stuff together to get a paycheck. And that's not going to produce you a good product.
I feel, so Kim's comment here was exactly what you said. My home inspector said that during the pandemic, the labor force is the problem. Inexperienced, yes, quality of craftsmanship. But what's interesting is that during the pandemic, we had a lot of during the pandemic, Bloomberg reached out to me 3 times to do an article about new realtors, and CNN as well, about new realtors getting into the real estate market. I feel like you had a lot of real estate agents that jumped into the market. A lot of people had time to sit at home. And so, hey, if you have time to sit at home, go get your real estate license. And there's money to be had in real estate. And I feel like we have a lot of, I'm not saying all new agents are not good quality, but I feel like there's a loss of quality because now when the market's getting tougher, you have agents that are like, well, how do I sell a home now? How do I get clients now? And so you'll see a lot of these agents that kind of got in thinking that it was super easy and had on Easy Street Ian can attest, when you put a home on before, it was just like, okay, how many offers are we going to have? Right? Like how many multiples of offers? Now, like we're having to do videos for every listing. We're having to go out and spend money on mailers. We're having to spend money on stuff just to get a home sold. So I feel like the quality of realtor, is going to change. You're going to see a different quality of realtor as well. There's a lot of realtors that watch this channel. So,
I think just to emphasize Jeremy's point is that is existing across almost all of the trades now, right? So someone can come in and have all the skill in the world. Like you said, they may not have the highest quality product, but then add another nail, right? Double it up, triple board it or something. Like there are ways around it, but you have to have that experience or that knowledge to be able to do exactly that. So you have somebody who comes in untrained, they work off of a script. Hey, put 2 nails in this board, make it happen. I'll give you $10 an hour. And well, then that's what they're going to do. It is a labor and education and product quality and knowledge issue, like all of it together.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people end up becoming overconfident in what they are doing. Like I've seen a lot of people who are like talking to me at the bar about all the money they're making in the stock market. And I'm trying to think, okay, well, you do realize that as long as you had money in the stock market, you were going to do well. Do you know when to pull out? Do you know when to get your money back? Do you know how to actually trade? Because I follow the economy pretty well, and I don't know if I could be a good day trader or stock trader or anything else like that. I do put some money into the stock market. I found my, little portfolio that I kind of work with. But when you have a market in which that is just skyrocketing every day, and you can just put a little bit of money towards anything and it goes up, you start believing that you can do it with just about any time in history, not realizing that you're going to have to suffer through downturns. And if you don't know about that, you're going to end up feeling a lot of pain. And now I'm going to the bar and people are shaking their heads talking about all the money they lost in the stock market and the crypto market and stuff. And I was just like, well, you guys didn't have the stomach for it, huh? You didn't know what you were doing. You didn't, and so that's really where like anything goes. I mean, whether you're selling real estate or selling, the deck packages or, doing anything, if you don't have the skills and the history to go along with different times, like when things are really easy, you put a house out there and you're getting listed, people offering before you even have a chance to even show it to them. That's not a hard market to work in, right? I mean, you could just all you have to do is just know the process of it and you're going to sell that house. But then when it comes to the time where you actually have to know how to sell a house, like to be able to say the right words and to ask the right questions and to be able to get the people to actually sign and follow through on the deal. That takes skill and knowledge and time and, wisdom to do that. That's not something that you get for, a years of experience, so just 1 year of experience. You have to be in it for a while,
I think that's really important what you said about the stock market and people getting in the stock market and making money in the stock market. I feel that over the last 2 years, we saw in real estate about a 10-year run in about 2 years. What I mean is typically on average, you see about, especially in Austin, prices rise between 6 and 9%. So over 5-year period, you have, 25, 30% equity more in a home. And we saw a lot of that happen within 2 years. And so now people are freaking out because the market's slowing down and they're going, oh no, I'm going to lose money if I buy a home. Well, the reality is if you're buying a home, you shouldn't worry about, you should worry about prices coming down, but if you're owning, you should worry about it if you're going to sell in 2 years. People started treating homes like stocks. The longer you stay in the stock market, the more you have the opportunity to continue to earn over time. Same thing with a home. I saw this graph. It was like the amount of money you make on average over a home. It was like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. 10 years, like 155, I think 259 and like $350,000 over a 30-year time frame. I think a lot of people saw quick gains and now they're like really worried because they see those quick gains and they're not thinking about a home as a long-term investment.
Yeah. Well, just me personally, because like you said, last year, I had no idea what I was going to do. Like prices of homes were expensive. I had to find a place to rent. There was nothing to rent in Astoria. Like literally nothing to rent. It was just amazing. There was 3 places and they were like off the charts expensive and they wouldn't let me bring my dog. So it was like I had to leave the area. Like I was like literally just there was going to be no place for me to live if I didn't buy a house. And so I was forced into it. I really felt like that. And then not to mention, I had a foreclosure in my past within the last 5 years. So I couldn't even get like, your typical loans that, most people would get for like less money down. I had to come up with 10% down and on an expensive home already. So I ended up putting 10% down and then had the home price go up by close to $100,000 after I purchased it to today. So like all this doesn't make like a lot of sense to me to see